a few of the things you've said on this topic, but I'll just let you invent yourself anew, however it strikes you. What is the relationship, in your view, between science and religion?
Well, I think that religious systems are descriptions of how people ought to act. And I think that those arose in a quasi-evolutionary manner. And so imagine the dominance hierarchy structure of a chimpanzee troop or a wolf pack. Okay, so we'll use the wolf idea first and then switch, if it's okay, to the chimpanzee idea. So as a consequence of the behavioral actions and interactions among social animals, you could think of something that might be described as a procedural covenant arising. And that would be the animal's knowledge of the structure of the dominance hierarchy, which is kind of ill-named, but we'll use that for now. So that there's a hierarchy of rank, and every animal in the social community understands that hierarchy of rank. That's essentially the culture of the troop or the pack. And there's an implicit recognition of the value of each individual within that troop or pack, such that, for example, if two wolves square off in a dominance dispute, of course they puff themselves up to make themselves look large, and they growl at each other, and they engage in ferociously threatening displays. And generally speaking, the wolf that has the lowest threshold for anxiety activation will capitulate first, generally without much more than the pose of a fight, and roll over and expose his neck. And then the dominant wolf will not deign to tear it out, basically. And you could think of the wolves acting out what you would describe propositionally as respect for each individual's value. And then in the chimp troops, Frans de Waal's research has indicated, for example, that if the dominance hierarchy is only based on brute force, and the chimp at the top, who's generally male, is there because he's a barbarian dictator, let's say, then he's very likely to be taken out by two male chimps, 3/4 his power, who are much better at social bonding and who've made a very tight compact between one another. And so that the chimp troop that's based on a tyranny is unstable. What de Waal indicated was that the chimp troops that tend to be more stable are run by dominant males who actually are very good at social bonding and reciprocity, and who pay a fair bit of attention to the females and infants in the troop. So the dominance isn't power so much as you might think of as good politics. And so there's an emergent ethic that, and I truly believe it's emergent ethic that's very similar to what Piaget described as emerging among children when they play games, that not only specifies the nature of the social contract, let's say, but also is structured as if the individuals within the social contract have some implicit value. So imagine that as human beings diverged away from their chimpanzee progenitors, the common ancestor we had with chimpanzees, we already started to act out this ethic. It was coded in our procedures, to speak technically, because we have a procedural memory. And then as we developed cortically, we watched each other and ourselves very, very intently. And once we developed language, we were able to start encapsulating that procedural ethic first in stories. And those stories were partly about what a very well-structured procedural ethic might be and how it might go wrong, but also about how an individual within that procedural ethic should be treated and should act. And the storytelling, which was the mapping of that procedure, was the birthplace of the image and story basis of religious ideation, as far as I can tell. So that's the basic thesis. It's like Piaget's notion that children, when they first come together to learn a game, if they're young enough, they can play the game when they're together. But if you take them out of the game and ask them individually about the rules, they give widely disparate accounts. So they've got the procedure in place, but they haven't got the episodic representation, technically speaking. It's only once they become more linguistically sophisticated that they can actually come up with a coherent representation of the rules. And then it's only later when they start to construe themselves not merely as followers of the rules, but also as originators of the rules. And that's akin to the recognition of, I would say, constructive individuality in relationship to the state. And so I see these things as very, very, very deeply biologically predicated.
Where's the concept of an archetype come into this picture?
Well, okay, imagine this, Sam. You tell me what you think about this. So you know how if you have can I tell you just a 2-minute story?
Sure.
So, okay, so one time I was at the hockey rink with my son, and he was young, he was about 12, and they were playing this championship game in this little league that they had. And my son was a pretty good hockey player, but there was a kid on the team who was better than him, who was kind of the star, but he was a diva, you know, and even though he would score goals and all of that, he wouldn't pass, and he wasn't facilitating the development of any of the other team members. And so anyways, we watched this game, and it was very close. It was a very exciting game. And in the final few minutes of the last period, the other team scored, and my son's team and this Stars team lost. And so then the kids went off the ice, and the diva kid smashed his hockey stick on the cement and started to complain bitterly about how unfair the game is. And then his idiot father came running up to him and told him how unfair the reffing had been, and how it was stolen from them, and how catastrophic all of that was. And I thought it was one of the most heinous displays of poor parenting that I'd ever seen. Now, so there's a moral of that story. So his kid was very good at playing hockey, but he wasn't very good at being a good player. And so, you know, you always tell your kids, doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game. And of course, you don't know what that means, and neither does the kid. And it's often a mystery to the kid what that means, because obviously you're trying to win. But imagine it this way. Imagine that that the goal of human life isn't to win the game. The goal of human life, in some sense, is to win the set of all possible games. And in order to win the set of all possible games, you don't need to win any particular game. You have to play in a manner that ensures that you will be invited to play more and more games. And so when you tell your children to be good sports, to play properly, what you mean is play to win, but play to win in such a way that people on your team are happy to play with you, and people on the other teams are happy to play with you, and so that you keep getting invited to games. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think of each game as a small hierarchy of value or dominance, then obviously the appropriate thing is to move up the hierarchy. And that's what animals do, is they move up in their specific hierarchy. But because human beings are capable of abstraction, we've been able to conceptualize the hierarchy as such, rather than any specific one, and then also to characterize a mode of being that is most likely to move you up the hierarchy, no matter what that hierarchy is. And as far as I can tell, that's the archetype of the hero. The hero is the person who's most likely to move up any given dominance hierarchy at any time in any place. And the hero is also, and then so that the nature of that archetypal hero first was acted out. It was laid out in procedure, and then it was acted out, and then it was described. But it's multidimensional. It's not only he who plays to be invited to play again, but also he who goes out into the great unknown to face chaos and the dangers there, but to gather what's valuable as a consequence and to bring it back to the community. And that's the basis of the dragon myth archetype, which is, of course, plays out in art and literature throughout recorded history. The oldest story we have, which is the Enuma Elish from Mesopotamia, is a a story about Marduk, who's the culture hero and also the highest god in the Mesopotamian pantheon. He confronts the dragon of chaos, cuts her into pieces, and makes the world. In fact, one of his names was Nam. I can't remember the name, unfortunately, but it meant he who creates ingenious things as a consequence of the combat with Tiamat, who's the dragon of chaos. So he cuts up the unknown into pieces and makes ingenious things out of them. And it's a perfect description of the human archetype, the fact that we are hyper-exploratory and that we use our capacity to explore the dangerous unknown to gather the treasure that lies there and then to distribute it to the community. So, and that, in terms of the evolution of that archetype, Sam, think about it this way, okay? And again, you can tell me what you think about this. So we know that, roughly speaking, that human females mate across and up dominance hierarchies, whereas chimpanzee females are non-selective maters. The dominant chimps, males, will chase away the subordinate chimps from the females in estrus, and so they're more likely to have offspring, but the females will mate with anyone, whereas human females are very selective and they have hidden ovulation and they mate across and up dominance hierarchy. So imagine the woman wants the man who's most capable of rising up the set of all dominance hierarchies. So what happens is she outsources that problem to the computational capacity of the male hierarchy, and she lets the men fight it out among themselves, compete and cooperate to determine who the best man is. He's provided with the majority of the mating opportunities. And so that's how the extended religious phenotype manifests itself in evolutionary space, which was something that you and Richard Dawkins were wondering about the last time that you talked. Like, it's not psychopathy, which was, in some sense, you were thinking about the charismatic liar, but really what's being selected for is the consciousness, because that's the right way of thinking about it, that's best able to rise across the set of all dominance hierarchies. And females are selecting very hard for that, which is at least in part why we've had this tremendously expanded cortical capacity.
如果您也喜欢这样的生活智慧，请帮我按赞、订阅并打开小铃铛。您的关注是我们最大的动力。